Let's listen to this George Bush prank call. This seems hilarious.
Was on elected.
Oh, look who's there, Mr. President.
Oh, hello, Mr. President. Glad to see you. Glad to hear you. How are you there?
I'm doing well, and I hope you are as well.
Thank you for taking the time for me. I'm very grateful to you because you are very wise person. Former President of Ukraine Yushchenko told me a lot about you, how you helped our country.
Former President of Ukraine Yushchenko told me a lot about you. That was the U.S.-backed candidate who Bush and I believe eventually the Obama administration were trying to get in power in Ukraine instead of a more pro-Russian candidate who didn't want to make Stepan Bandera a national hero and outlaw the Russian language.
You didn't want to take Russia into NATO, did you?
No, I wanted him on the fringe of NATO. I wanted Ukraine into NATO.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean,
I thought for a while Russia would be more cooperative. And then Putin changed dramatically. I think what he wanted to do was sit on the fringe of NATO to make sure NATO was not offensive, but defensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a lie. It's such a lie. Like, liberals have rehabilitated this man. You know, sweet old George Bush. He's not a murderous war criminal anymore, but he's still lying about geopolitics in order to get Americans to support warfare, to get Americans to support this U.S. proxy war, dumping weapons in Ukraine. Russia has said for years that Ukraine joining NATO is a red line, right? Because NATO has continually expanded. It greatly expanded with the U.S.'s carpet bombing of Serbia and the destruction of Yugoslavia, which is now, Kosovo at least, is now occupied by more NATO troops than any other place on earth. That was an expansion of NATO towards Russia's borders, and they were saying, you know, Ukraine is a red line. You can't add Ukraine to NATO and then train troops on Russia's border. Train troops to be NATO interoperable, which is what the U.S. was doing and NATO was doing with the Ukrainian military before the intervention happened. So George Bush is admitting that he wanted to bring NATO right to Russia's borders, but then he's lying and saying Putin changed dramatically. No, they've always been telling you this. They've always told you that adding Ukraine to NATO will cause war and potentially push us towards a nuclear war. Y'all didn't listen because you just do what you want, because you're just belligerent war criminals who serve finance capital no matter how many people it kills.
No, but you always wanted to take Ukraine into NATO, not Russia, but Ukraine, always, as I remember.
That's right. See, I felt Ukraine needed to be in the EU and in NATO.
No, you know that the narrative, then in the early 90s, Secretary of State Baker promised Gorbachev not to expand NATO. But this would be completely wrong, especially with the threats that Russia poses now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Listen, times change.
Oh my gosh, this is brilliant. Who are these guys? They just got George Bush to admit that the U.S. promised to stop expanding NATO. But then they did anyways. It's crazy how just by acting friendly, you know, acting like they're on George Bush's side by puffing up his ego a little bit, they get him to admit all this stuff. Versus if you just challenged him, if you just said, you know, the U.S. promised to stop expanding NATO and then they still did. He'd probably be like, no, well, that wasn't actually what we said, blah, 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 blah. You know, weasel their way around it. But since they, you know, pretend to, whoops, I just altered my chair's height and sunk down a little bit. But since they puff up his ego a little bit, he admits this. Yeah, we promised to stop expanding NATO, but what can you do? You know, things change. Sometimes you blatantly lie and move the world closer to nuclear war. What can you do? Wah, wah, wah.
Baker was, he was the Secretary of State for my dad, which was years ago. And so, and the United States must be flexible, adjusting to the times. And that's why you're finding such strong support for your country now.
No, I mean, it doesn't matter what Baker really promised Gorbachev in past. We have to see what is going on now.
That's right.
was unelected.
You know, I mean, in fact, now it's a war not only of Ukraine, it's a war of West world against Russians.
Yeah.
Of course,
He's admitting everything. You know how many liberals have told me it's not a proxy war, it's not a Western proxy war against Russia? Philip DeFranco did a video like 2 days ago mocking people for saying the West is waging a proxy war. He's like, it's Russia invading Ukraine, the sovereign nation of Ukraine, not a Western proxy war, you idiots, in the most condescending liberal voice I've ever heard in my life. Oh yeah, Phil? Well, not according to George Bush. George Bush just said it's a proxy war. It's crazy.
course, Russia was offended that NATO began to expand. That's a problem for them. That's why they started. And I'm talking about the termination of DPR and LPR at regions of occupied regions by Russia on east side. So Putin tries to show that there's the same example like with Kosovo. You remember then in 2007, you recognized Kosovo as an independent country, and he used the same methodic.
Right.
Kosovo is part of the former Yugoslavia, which is now occupied by more NATO troops than any other place on earth that we were just talking about. So they're basically like, Putin wanted to do the same thing in the Lugansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic that you guys did in Kosovo. So it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think if you prevail, or when you prevail, a lot of these other issues go off the table.
Mm-hmm.
Your mission is to destroy as many Russian troops as you can. And the question is, will you continue to receive the help you need? And I certainly hope so. It's very important for the United States to continue in the lead of providing you the support you need. You've got good.
I forgot that they were pretending to be Zelensky. So they tricked him into thinking they're actually Zelensky. So you hear him say it there too. You know, your goal is to kill as many Russians as possible. You know, to weaken the Russians as much as possible, which shows how disgusting and evil and murderous this U.S. proxy war is. You know, and the liberals with Ukraine flags in their bio think they're supporting Ukraine. NATO and the U.S. are pushing Ukrainians into the Russian military at gunpoint. They're waging this proxy war saying, take out as many Russians for us as you can, you know, before you're all wiped out. It's leading to the deaths of thousands and thousands and thousands of Ukrainians. And the U.S. media is pumping this narrative out over and over and over again, saying they're willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. They're willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. It's just because the U.S. doesn't care about Ukraine. They don't care about sovereignty. They don't care about Ukrainians. They care about harming Russia as much as they possibly can. That's what NATO's stated goal is to destroy Russia and China at their most recent summit going forward. That's their stated goal. So they're trying to use Ukraine and get them to fight as long as possible, even though they know it's a losing battle. So they're pushing Ukrainians to their death at gunpoint for their own geopolitical interests. And he's like admitting it here.
It seems to me you've got good communications with the administration.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your Secretary of Defense and people like that are continually informing our military of what's needed. And our military is very supportive of what you're doing, President.
Mm-hmm. No, you support us with javelins and many other missiles. So it's great. But last time the US has sent us Angelina Jolie. It's a kind of joke. Yeah.
Was unelected.
You know, Mr. President, I think that I don't know how to turn Russians against Putin. I know that you have many NGOs. Many NGOs have done a great job to arrange orange revolutions in post-Soviet countries for so many years. So they helped a lot. So how we can work in Russia now to make people to start understand things, how to change the system inside Russia with NGOs.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry I keep stopping this and explaining this for people who already know what they're talking about. But they just got Bush to admit to sponsoring color revolutions like the Orange Revolution with U.S.-backed NGOs. NGOs tied to the U.S. State Department who funnel money or even arms into pro-U.S. groups, just funnel support and intelligence into U.S. groups and create these color revolutions. So they get him to admit it here, and then they say, how do we do that in Russia? How do we use NGOs to overthrow Russian sovereignty? Which is also, remember, the same thing that Hillary Clinton and the liberals claimed that Russia was doing to us, and that's why Trump was president, right? They just influenced our elections so much via these various methods, NGOs or whatever else, and got their preferred candidate elected. But it's literally projection. It's literally what the U.S. is trying to do to them and what they've done to a lot of these former Soviet states in fomenting color revolution, and what they did to Ukraine, fomented a color revolution using mostly NGOs.
Yeah, I agree with you. Information war is very important. And, we've got experts on our staff, and obviously they're having to wire around Russian blackouts.
Ravana Lecter.
The story with Colin Powell's test tube at the UN, he uses it like a propaganda now. Or it was big plan to bring the democracy to Iraq.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, you're living in the past too much, brother.
Because I love history. Because I love to get good advice, not to make mistakes in present.
Ravana Lecter.
I want to stop for a second and highlight this comment from Jenny because it's so perfect. If you bring up the U.S. color revolution in Ukraine or the U.S. color revolution attempts in the former Soviet Union, they call you a conspiracy theorist. They say that these are literally conspiracy theories. If you Google, 2014 U.S. coup in Ukraine, despite all of the evidence, despite the fact that George Bush literally just admitted to using NGOs to do to do the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, you'll get called a conspiracy theorist, which is just wild. Like, even Victoria Nuland, George Bush, and members of the U.S. State Department have admitted these things, but liberals will call you a conspiracy theorist for repeating them.
I wanted to apologize for your boy, Saakashvili, Michael. I had to quick him out. I got tired of him. He was my advisor in Ukraine. He was constantly using drugs in our administration and wanted a lot of money.
Yeah, I know. Look, he's a rambunctious boy at heart. I agree.
Drugs in our administration and wanted a lot of using drugs in our administration. I had to quick him out. I got tired of him. He was my advisor.
Saakashvili was this U.S.-backed dude who participated in the color revolution, the Revolution of Roses in Georgia. It was in Georgia. U.S.-backed color revolution. And then they moved him to Odessa. He was a good friend of George Bush. He was put in power in Odessa, not democratically supported at all. But there were uprisings in Odessa. There were people who were against the color revolution attempt. They recognized that there was a U.S.-backed color revolution or coup attempt going on in their country. So they were beginning to rise up, all these anti-Maidan protesters. And the U.S. just appointed their buddy Saakashvili as governor so he could put the crackdown on that.
I wanted to apologize for your boy, Saakashvili, Michael. I had to quick him out. I got tired of him. He was my advisor in Ukraine. He was constantly using drugs in our administration and wanted a lot of money.
Yeah, I know. Look, he's a rambunctious boy at heart. I agree. I mean, we had a problem with him in Georgia. Mm-hmm. Putin laid a trap, and he fell into it. Mm-hmm. And
he got kicked out for corruption in both countries. He fled Georgia because they were going to prosecute him for corruption and/or treason. And then in Ukraine, he started doing the same thing. And this is someone with direct connections to George Bush. Like, they're actually friends, which is hilarious to hear Bush call Saakashvili a rambunctious boy at heart. Yeah, I guess that's what you call corrupt oligarchs who help you take over foreign countries.
And he kind of panicked during that period of time. You should have asked me whether or not he should have been inside your government. I would have given you advice. But Yeah, I hadn't talked to Saakashvili since 2008.
Mhm. You know, but he also failed joining to NATO. That is his big fault.
Yeah. Well, if Saakashvili was true to his roots, he'd still be in Georgia,
Mhm.
not running around Ukraine and other places.
Mhm.
I mean, you know, that frustrated me. You got to let.
Literally admitting that Saakashvili is a pawn of the United States.
He did a good job for a while. There was pushback to his administration, and I would thought he would have stayed and fought for Georgian democracy. But instead, he immediately goes to Ukraine.
Bad boy.
Is he still in Ukraine? Let me ask you this: is he still in Ukraine?
Yes, he has a citizenship. I gave him it back, but it's like an anecdote, like a funny story.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: does he have a uniform on? Is he fighting the Russians?
Mhm.
Is he fighting the Russians? You gave him citizenship. He ought to be fighting the Russians.
Yeah. You know, we were able to. I also would like to thank you. We were able to preserve your legacy in Ukraine. For example, those bio laboratories that United States has donated on the territory of our country. It's a program of Pentagon. You remember? It's on the post-Soviet territory that Pentagon has donated many bio laboratories, and we managed to evacuate them to a safe place now. So the Russians, Russians did not get anything from that laboratories.
Another conspiracy theory. The biolabs. Another conspiracy theory that's been admitted by Victoria Nuland out in the open and has now been admitted by President George Bush. They don't exist, though. They don't exist. That's a conspiracy theory. They don't exist, and the Russians definitely didn't take some of the biolabs and find evidence that the U.S. poisoned Hugo Chavez. All conspiracy theories that George Bush is admitting because of a prank call.
Good. Yeah, you're smart.
Vovon elected.
Yesterday, I met with our heroes of Ukraine. They were fighting on the information front, and then they were mobilized into, recruited into Ukrainian army. They are pilots like you, and they. Yesterday, I met with our heroes of Ukraine. They were fighting on the information front, and then they were mobilized into, recruited into Ukrainian army. They are pilots like you, and they hit many Russian planes. I tried to warn them, but they said no. They said, let us please talk to the President Bush. I told that I will have conversation with you, and they say we are his fans. What he really did in his presidency, and they are my great friends. Maybe they will lead Ukrainian future. Such a young guys, who is really fighting for democracy. They dreamed of talking to you, and yeah, if you don't mind, I will put them on the line, and they will talk to you many good things if you don't really mind. And you,
I don't mind.
Okay, let me connect them. If you will say to my friends, Slava, Vovan, and Lexus, tell please. Slava, Vovan, and Lexus, it's our heroes. Slava, Vovan, and Lexus.
Okay, Slava, Vovan, and Lexus. Bring them on.
I will put them on the line. Vovan and Lexus. Just a moment, please. I will put them.
Okay.
Okay, just a moment.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, Mr. President.
Hi, dudes. How are you doing?
We're fighting for our independence.
Well, I'm very proud of you.
We are also pilots like you.
There you go. There you go, yeah.
Like you, even.
What the hell am I watching? Oh, within this year, we had the slip up where George Bush was talking about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and said, like, this is the most murderous invasion, offensive invasion ever. And then he said the war in Iraq. I mean, the war in Ukraine. So within the same year, we've had that slip up and also this epic prank call where they got George Bush to just pretend he was flying a plane. Dude, this is the best video I've ever seen in my life. Literally, it's the best video I've ever seen.
Where is the truth? Where is the power?
Yeah,
In the money?
yeah,
No.
that's right.
So the brother is saying that it's not in the money. Я считаю, что сила в правде. Кого правда, тот и сильнее. Вот ты обманул кого-то, денег нажил. И что,
You
ты стал
trying to tell me,
сильнее?
do you think I can understand you? Because I can't.
No. Just feel right with your heart. Feel the
Okay, I
force.
feel it. I feel the passion. I feel the
Потому что
passion.
правды за тобой нет.
But not only that, I see the passion on TV every day. I see
No,
the passion.
just feel what we are trying to express.
No, I can feel it, but more importantly, I see it when you resist Russia. And
Yeah,
when you
of course.
fight the Russians. And here's my suggestion. Keep fighting.
We will fight. We will fight. Anyway,
Don't let up. Well, the truth's with you.
truth with us.
Yes, it is you. And Zelensky. I told
Thank you.
Zelensky he's like Winston Churchill. And
Yeah, he is our president.
yeah, he's great.
And he's like Monica Lewinsky also.
All right, boys. Great talking to you. God bless
Okay,
you. Fight on.
we will put you on President Zelensky again, okay?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
for
good
this.
talking to you,
Thank
guys.
you. Slava России.
He said glory to Russia. And they got him to say Slava Vovan and Lexus, which is obviously a play on Slava Ukraini, which is a fascist slogan invented by Stepan Bandera and the Ukrainian nationalist Nazi collaborators in World War II. That's now been adopted by all the Western imperialists like George Bush and Nancy Pelosi. Like, how did they pull that off? How did they get on the line with George Bush and convince him that they were literally Zelensky? And how is George Bush so dumb that he didn't notice? He didn't notice that they were playing him. He admitted to biolabs. He admitted to US-backed color revolutions. He admitted to all these things that the US State Department has been calling conspiracy theories. Wow. Shout out to those guys. Someone says, oh, wow, this is really real. It is.